I held my hand out, ready to greet the new CEO, and that was all it took for the chairman to decide I didn't belong at his table. He didn't even look at my face first. He looked at my hand, then at the folder under my arm, then at the flowers I was carrying, white lilies and eucalyptus, the kind someone's assistant orders when they want the room to look welcoming for a big announcement. The cameras were already rolling. Red light on, 3 angles. One for the internal stream, one for the external investors, one for the archive no one thinks about until there's a scandal. I stepped up beside his chair, extended my hand toward the incoming CEO and said, "Welcome to Northbridge." Before the new CEO could react, the chairman turned his head, took in my gesture, and gave a small, practiced scoff into his lapel mic. "I don't shake hands with low-level employees," he said, loud enough to be crystal clear in the room and on every live feed. The reaction was immediate. A couple of board members smirked. Someone halfway down the table did that nervous laugh people do when they know something's wrong but don't want to be the first to admit it. One of the communications staff at the back covered his grin with a folder, like that would somehow hide the expression from the cameras trained directly on us. The new CEO, Ethan Marsh, shifted in his seat and glanced down at the table instead of at my hand. He didn't shake it. He didn't say anything. He didn't correct the chairman. He just looked away. I didn't pull my hand back, not yet. For a brief second, the chairman seemed bothered by that. His smile faltered a hair. His eyes flicked from my hand to my face as if he was checking whether I had misunderstood the hierarchy he just announced to the entire world. The flowers felt heavier in my arm. "I'm here as instructed," I said, keeping my voice even. He leaned back in his chair without hiding the contempt. "Then stand where you're told," he replied. "This meeting is for executives." Someone near the end of the table muttered, "Awkward," just loud enough for his neighbor to hear and for the nearest mic to catch. I lowered my hand, but on my terms, not his, and placed the flowers on the table just at the edge of his eyeline. Then I walked to the empty seat at the far end of the board table and sat down. The laughter lingered a second longer, thinner now, stretched over the silence that followed. "Let's begin," the chairman said, already turning toward the main screen at the front. The first slide appeared, logo, date, Northbridge Holdings Leadership Transition and Capital Structure Update. I waited. Let them get through the title. "Before you go further," I said, "there's one thing you should know." The chairman's head turned back toward me slowly, like I'd just interrupted a sermon. "We're not taking commentary from staff during this session," he said. His tone carried that same amused cruelty. I met his eyes. "If you're refusing to shake my hand," I said, still calm, still level, "then by tomorrow morning, $2.5 billion will no longer be part of this deal." The silence hit harder than the laughter had. It wasn't disbelief. It was a vacuum. Then, predictably, someone laughed a little too loudly. "Okay," a board member said, "that's enough." Another chimed in, almost relieved. "All right, let's keep this professional." The chairman's smile came back brittle. "Sit down," he said. "We're behind schedule." "I already am," I replied. They had no idea yet. They would, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how a guy they thought was a low-level errand runner ended up being the one person in that room who could make, or break, the largest funding round in the company's history. If you've ever had someone write you off in public because they decided you were beneath them, hit subscribe. Because this story isn't really about a handshake. It's about what that handshake represented, and what it cost them to treat it like a joke. My name is Aaron Price. I'm 41 years old, and until 3 weeks ago I was the managing partner of a private capital firm called Pelion Ridge. If you've never heard of us, that's deliberate. We don't advertise. We don't sponsor conferences. We don't slap our name on stadiums. We move quietly, write large checks, and expect 2 things in return: discipline with our money, respect for the conditions under which we give it. Northbridge Holdings was supposed to be our flagship deal. $2.5 billion in committed capital, structured over multiple tranches, tied to a high-profile acquisition and a leadership transition they wanted to turn into a PR event. To them, this was about a headline. To us, it was about risk. Pelion Ridge didn't start as we. It started as me and a laptop on a second-hand desk in a 2-room office above a dentist in a strip mall. Before that, I was on the other side of the table. For 10 years, I worked in corporate treasury and capital markets for a mid-tier industrial group. My job was simple on paper and miserable in practice. Keep us funded. Keep us compliant. Keep the rating agencies from turning us into a case study in what not to do. I saw up close what happens when capital is treated like an entitlement instead of a responsibility. I saw bankers smile in your face and quietly shift your risk rating 2 notches down because your CEO couldn't stop running his mouth on earnings calls. I watched deals fall apart because someone in a position of power decided humility was beneath them. My father used to say something that stuck with me long after he was gone. Money doesn't change people. It just makes it easier to see who they already were. After one too many strategic refinancings that were really just emergency life support, I walked away. I took what I knew about capital structures, risk covenants, and how executives think, or don't think under pressure, and started Pelion Ridge. The pitch was straightforward. We write big checks. We stay out of your day-to-day operations. But the cost of that freedom is very specific behavior when it matters. We wrote our first fund from a handful of institutional backers who were tired of seeing their investments wrecked by management teams whose egos outpaced their ethics. On paper, we were about IRRs, covenants, and exit multiples. In reality, we were about something more basic. Don't be stupid with other people's money. Don't be cruel with the people who keep your company alive. Don't treat accountability like an optional feature. Northbridge entered our orbit during their transformation phase, which is a nice way of saying they'd grown too fast, layered on too much debt, and now needed cash and a story. They were a conglomerate of mid-market businesses stitched together under one holding company: logistics, industrial services, a tech platform they couldn't describe clearly even in their own materials. They had reach. They had brand recognition. They had decent assets. What they didn't have was liquidity. Their outgoing CEO had spent 5 years chasing acquisitions like souvenirs. He'd leveraged the balance sheet, cut operational muscle instead of fat, and smoothed over problems with phrases like short-term volatility and transient headwinds. The market stopped believing him. Vendors started tightening terms. Banks stopped returning calls as quickly. By the time Pelion Ridge got involved, Northbridge needed a capital injection and a leadership reset. They got both. On paper. Structured a deal. Pelion Ridge would commit $2.5 billion in private capital. Northbridge would appoint a new CEO with a mandate to clean house and stabilize operations. The board would adopt a set of governance reforms to prevent another souvenir acquisition spree. And then there was the clause. The one everyone skimmed past at first because it looked like legal wallpaper. I'd insisted on it. Our counsel had drafted it. We called it, politely, the conduct integrity provision. In simple terms, it said, if, during negotiations or closing, any documented conduct by senior leadership materially harmed the reputational standing of the company or its incoming leadership, Pelion Ridge could withdraw its capital commitment immediately. No penalty, no delay, no renegotiation rights, capital off the table. It wasn't theoretical for me. It came from experience. 2 years earlier, we'd committed to a smaller deal. A $600 million injection into a regional infrastructure firm. I trusted their chairman. I delegated more than I should have to my second in command. Then 3 days before closing, a video went public. The chairman berating a line worker in front of an entire town hall, calling him replaceable trash, laughing while others laughed. We still closed. We shouldn't have. Within 6 months, that clip was in every union negotiation. In every regulator's back pocket. In every journalist's file. We got our return eventually, but the cost in time, energy, and endless reputational triage wasn't worth the IRR on paper. I promised myself it wouldn't happen again. If I was going to put billions behind a company, I needed more than clean numbers. I needed to see how the people in charge behaved when they thought they weren't being watched closely. That's why the clause went in. And that's why I insisted on attending the Northbridge Transition Board meeting in person. I wanted to see them up close. I wanted them to see me. They had a different idea. The invitation came through official channels, formal email, formal agenda, board strategy session, and CEO transition announcement. Location: Northbridge Headquarters, Main Boardroom. Attendees: Board of Directors, incoming CEO, select senior executives, representative from Pelion Ridge Capital. They didn't put my name on the invite. The line read, Pelion Ridge Representative TBD. I noticed it. So did my partners. You sure you want to go in person? My co-partner Sam asked. Send a VP, that's what they're expecting anyway. I'm sure, I said. I delegated once. I knew how that ended. The morning of the meeting, I landed, changed in the airport lounge, and took a car straight to Northbridge's downtown glass box. The lobby was all marble, steel, and screens. Share price ticker on one wall, promo video of smiling workers and drone shots of warehouses on another. The receptionist gave me a practice smile. Welcome to Northbridge. Name: Erin Price, here for the board session. Her hands paused over the keyboard for half a beat. Then she typed. The pause was subtle, but I'd learned to notice those. Of course, Mr. Price, she said. Someone from Investor Relations will come down. Investor Relations, not the board office. Interesting. A few minutes later, a guy in a too-tight suit and a too-bright tie walked over. Mr. Price, I'm Dylan. I'll escort you up. We made small talk in the elevator. He asked about my flight. I asked about the turnout today. Big day, he said, forcing enthusiasm. Lots of eyes on this. What's the mood upstairs? I asked. He hesitated. Eager, he said eventually, and anxious. The doors opened to the executive floor, softer carpet, quieter halls. Dylan led me past framed photos of past CEOs shaking hands with dignitaries, cutting ribbons, standing in front of facilities they no longer owned. We stopped outside a set of double glass doors. 2 cameras were mounted above them, red lights off. For the webcast, Dylan said when he saw me glance up. Leadership wants transparency today. I thought of the clause. Good, I said. Inside, the boardroom looked like someone had ordered Successful Corporate from a catalog. Long polished table, high-backed leather chairs, one entire wall of glass overlooking the city, opposite wall lined with large screens already primed for slides, and in the corner on a credenza, the flowers, white lilies, eucalyptus. The same arrangement I'd seen on the invoice Pelion Ridge received when we agreed to sponsor refreshments and decor for the event. They asked me to bring those in when I arrived, I said, nodding toward the flowers. Dylan picked them up and handed them to me. Optics, he said quietly. They wanted to look warm. I took the flowers. Warmth wasn't the word I'd use for what came next. The chairman of the board was a man named Gerald Lang, early 60s, sharp suit, sharper smile. He liked to describe himself as old school. Other people called him other things when he wasn't in the room. We met once briefly during an earlier diligence session. We'd spoken for maybe 7 minutes. Not enough time for him to remember my face. Too much time for me to forget his. When I stepped into the boardroom, a few people were already seated. Gerald at the head of the table, 2 directors to his right, 1 to his left. Ethan, the incoming CEO, near the middle, flipping through a printed deck. A communications team in the back setting up the live stream. The red light on one camera blinked on as soon as I crossed the threshold. Ah, Gerald said, spotting the flowers first, not me. Perfect. Set those on the sideboard. I can hold them, I said. They were sent to me. He frowned just slightly, then dismissed it. Fine, he said, turning back to the table. We'll be starting shortly. Dylan quietly melted into the back of the room. No one introduced me. No one asked my name. No one said this is the managing partner from the firm providing our largest capital tranche. They saw flowers in my hand. No nameplate in front of me. No familiar face from their usual bank rotation. And they decided what I was, support staff, a prop, someone to fill empty chairs for optics. I walked around the table toward Ethan. He was younger than I expected, late 30s, good haircut, good suit, eyes tired in a way that said he'd been repeating talking points for weeks. He looked up as I approached. I put the flowers down on the table's edge, freeing my hand, and extended it toward him. Welcome to Northbridge, I said. I'm Aaron. Before he could move, Gerald swiveled his chair our way. He saw my hand, saw the gesture, saw an opportunity. He lifted his mic a little closer to his mouth, smiled that talk show host smile, and said into the room, I don't shake hands with low-level employees. The sentence hung there, clear and sharp. It bounced off the glass, off the cameras, off the faces around him. A board member to his right chuckled, too quickly. An operations executive near the far end made a strangled sound that could have been a laugh or a reflex. Someone at the back coughed into their fist to hide a grin. Ethan's eyes went from my hand to Gerald, then down to the table like he just remembered where the power sat. He didn't move his hand, didn't correct the chairman, didn't say, "That's out of line." He just stared at the agenda. I didn't drop my hand immediately. For a second or two, Gerald's smile wavered. He seemed genuinely annoyed that I hadn't flinched on cue. His eyes flicked up to mine as if to check whether I was too stupid to understand the insult. "I'm here as instructed," I said, my voice calm enough that the closest mic still caught every word. "Then stand where you're told," he replied. "This meeting is for executives." The comms guy at the back shifted his weight. He knew exactly how that would sound on replay. I lowered my hand slowly and took the empty chair near the end of the table. No nameplate, no label, good. They'd written my role out of the script. They were about to find out what that cost. "Let's begin," Gerald said, turning toward the main screen. The first slide came up. Logo, tagline, "We are Northbridge." He launched into his opening remarks. I listened. I took in the rhythm of his voice, the way the others reacted to him, the little tells that come out when people forget who's in the room. He talked about historic partnership. He talked about strategic capital. He talked about aligning leadership with long-term shareholder value. He didn't mention Pelion Ridge by name. He didn't mention the clause. He certainly didn't mention that the man he just called a low-level employee controlled more leverage over his next 5 years than anyone else at that table. As the second slide came up, transaction overview, I spoke. "Before you go further," I said, loud enough to cut through his momentum, "there's one thing you should know." Gerald turned, annoyed at the interruption. "We're not taking input from staff during this session," he said. "You can give your notes to investor relations afterward." I met his eyes. "If you're refusing to shake my hand," I said, "then by tomorrow morning $2.5 billion will no longer be part of this deal." The room didn't gasp. Real boardrooms don't gasp. They go quiet, utterly, completely. Phones stopped moving. Pens stopped. Eyes shifted. Someone laughed after a beat, but it was forced, too loud, like they were trying to snap the room back to the script. "All right," a director said. "That's enough drama. Let's stay focused." Gerald gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take a seat and save the theatrics," he said. "Capital is being handled." "I am capital," I replied, "but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Because the power wasn't in that line. It was in what came after, in the way they responded. In the way the clause finally did exactly what it was designed to do. You don't walk into a room like that planning to pull the plug. You walk in with conditions, not ultimatums. You reserve the nuclear option for when you're certain the people across from you are a risk, not just an irritation. I didn't decide to withdraw in that moment. I'd already decided where the line was. Gerald didn't just step over it. He filmed it. In a room with cameras running, with an incoming CEO watching, with a board whose job on paper was to steward reputational risk. And he turned deliberate disrespect into a punchline. Not in private, in a broadcast. He proved in the clearest possible way that if we moved forward, we'd be tying Pelion Ridge's name and our investors' money to a leadership culture that thought that kind of contempt was acceptable under lights. The clause was clear. Documented conduct during negotiations that materially harms reputational integrity. The documentation was blinking red in the corner of the room. All I had to do was decide whether I meant what I'd written. They carried on as if I'd never spoken, because that's what people do when they don't yet believe consequences are real. "Let's hear from finance," Gerald said. The CFO, a precise man named Paul Graves, cleared his throat and launched into his section. Debt schedules, refinancing plans, projected cash flow with and without Pelion Ridge's commitment. It was a neat story. Tight. Confident. Built on an assumption he never should have treated as a guarantee that the capital would be there because they wanted it there, not because they'd behaved like people worthy of it. At one point, as I shifted the flowers from the table to the floor so they'd stop blocking my view of the deck, Gerald glanced over. "You can leave those outside," he said, not bothering to hide the irritation. "They're distracting." "I'll keep them here," I replied. "That wasn't a suggestion," he said. "They were sent under my name," I said. "They stay." A few heads turned. Ethan looked up for the first time since the meeting began, eyes flicking between us. "We're not here to debate decor," Gerald said, letting sarcasm drip. "We're here to finalize authority." "Authority requires clarity," I said. That earned me a couple of narrowed eyes. "And who exactly are you here for?" he asked. "I'm here for the capital," I said. He gave a dismissive little snort. "That's being handled," he said. "Thank you." At the far end of the table, Paul, the CFO, looked from Gerald to me, then back at his notes. He hesitated. "Before we move on," he said cautiously, "we still haven't confirmed final sign-off from the capital provider." "Legal will handle it," Gerald snapped. "We've been over this." "With respect," Paul said, "the release requires direct confirmation. It's not a rubber stamp." He glanced at me again, just a flicker. Gerald followed his gaze like a man tracking a fly. "From legal." He said. "From the Capitol controller," Paul corrected. The room shifted, subtle, chairs adjusted, pens paused, eyes turned. I met Gerald's stare. "That would be me," I said. For a second he just looked at me, really looked. Not at the flowers, not at where I was sitting, at my face. "You're saying you control the funds," he said slowly. "I'm saying I'm the managing partner at Pelion Ridge authorized to release them," I replied. A board member farther down scoffed. "You," he said. "Yes," I answered. Ethan leaned forward, finally participating. "How much authority are we talking?" he asked. "Over the total commitment." "All of it," I said. Silence settled again, thicker. "Pelion Ridge's tranche accounts for the largest portion of this structure," I added. "Without it, the remaining commitments can't proceed as designed. Some won't proceed at all." "That's not what we were told," Gerald said. "That's because you never asked," I replied. Paul nodded once, confirming. He caught himself, corrected. "He is listed as the sole signatory on the primary capital agreements." Gerald's voice cooled. "This meeting is about final alignment," he said, "not introductions." "Final alignment requires the person who can say yes," I said, "or no." A director cleared his throat. "So this isn't ceremonial," he said slowly. "It never was," I replied. Gerald straightened in his chair, tried to recover the rhythm. "Then perhaps we should restart properly," he said. "Now that roles are clear." "If you'd like," I said. He hesitated, just long enough. The room knew, even if they didn't say it out loud. They understood that the power dynamic they'd walked in with wasn't the one they were leaving with. They just didn't know how quickly it was about to flip. The clause came up because Paul wouldn't let it disappear. As they tried to push back into the deck, he tapped the folder in front of him. "There is one item we still need to acknowledge," he said. Gerald didn't look at him. "We've acknowledged everything," he said. "We've been reviewing this for months." "The conduct provision," Paul said, "that got everyone's attention." A director flipped pages. "This one," he said, reading. "Reputational conduct, capital withdrawal rights." Ethan leaned forward. "What does it say exactly?" he asked. "It ties capital deployment to reputational integrity during negotiations," Paul said. "Any documented conduct that materially harms standing allows for immediate withdrawal." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. Another board member spoke up, skimming further down. "It doesn't require intent," he said, "just impact and documentation." "This was boilerplate," Gerald snapped. "We put that in everything." "It was revised," Paul said quietly. "Pelion Ridge requested that language." "At my insistence," I added. Gerald turned to me. "You were concerned about optics," he asked. "I was concerned about behavior," I said. He scoffed. "This is turning into a distraction," he said. "We're talking about hypotheticals. Nobody's misbehaving." A director looked up toward the small camera mounted in the corner. "This meeting is being recorded," he said. "For transparency," Gerald snapped. "Yes," I said, "for transparency." It wasn't the moment that ended him, but it was the moment he lost control of the narrative. When the recess was called, everyone moved fast. Because that's what people do when they want to get out of a room stuffed with the wrong kind of electricity. 10 minutes, Gerald said, rapping the table once. "We'll reconvene and wrap this." People stood, voices rose, bodies angled away from me like proximity might turn into blame. I stayed seated a moment longer, watched who left first, who lingered, who pretended to be on their phone, already messaging someone about what just happened. Then I stood, picked up my folder, left the flowers on the floor, and walked out into the corridor. The hallway was cooler, quieter. 2 directors stood near the windows, speaking in low voices that stopped the second they saw me. Gerald walked by on his phone, already spinning. "It's just posturing," he said to whoever was on the other end. "We'll calm him down." He didn't even lower his voice. Paul approached me. "Aaron," he said, "we should talk before we go back in." "Not now," I said. He nodded. "Understood." I stepped into a small alcove near the service elevator and pulled out my phone. One number, no hesitation. My partner, Sam, picked up on the second ring. "Yeah, activate the withdrawal," I said, "effective immediately." There was a pause, long enough to confirm he'd heard me. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it," I said. "Reason code, conduct during negotiations, documentation available." "Understood," he said. "We'll execute now, you sure?" "Yes." The line clicked dead. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stood there for a moment, feeling my heart rate settle instead of spike. The thing about lines is, if you don't act when they're crossed, they were never lines. They were suggestions. I don't deal in suggestions. When I walked back into the boardroom, the red record light on the camera was still on. The room was trying hard to pretend nothing had shifted. Chairs pushed back in. Water poured. Voices light. Controlled. Gerald looked up as I took my seat again. "We'll resume now," he said, the edge back in his voice. "Let's keep this focused." I placed my phone face down on the table, didn't touch it, didn't need to. The deck came back on screen. Projections again, charts, timelines, all of them built on an assumption that was already gone. "On this slide," Paul began, "you can see the liquidity runway with the Pelion Ridge commitment." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His expression changed in real time. The words caught in his throat. Another phone buzzed. Another, a low, asynchronous chorus. "Let's silence devices," Gerald said sharply. "We're mid-meeting." Paul didn't move to silence his. He stared at the screen, then at the second notification that landed a heartbeat later. His face went from neutral to ashen, like someone was slowly draining the color out of him. "Paul," Gerald said, "is there a problem?" Paul swallowed. "The primary tranche," he said, "it's been withdrawn." You could feel the room flinch, not visibly, internally. "Withdrawn how?" Gerald asked. "We're in the middle of closing." "Executed," Paul said. "Confirmed full amount, $2.5 billion. "That's not possible," a director said. "We have timelines," Gerald snapped. "We had timelines," Paul said. "They just changed." Ethan looked at me. "Did you?" "Yes," I said. "You can't just pull that kind of capital," Gerald said. "You signed, we signed." "The clause allows it," I said. "You ensured the conditions were met." "This is unacceptable," he said, standing again. "You will reverse it now." "There's nothing to reverse," I said. "It's done." "You don't get to decide that," he said. "This board does." "The board doesn't own Pelion Ridge's money," I replied. "You were being given access to it under conditions. You violated them on camera." "We can explain this," he said, looking around the table for allies. "He's overreacting. It was a joke." "It's documented conduct in a formal negotiation session," a director said, "in front of the incoming CEO. On a live stream. It makes us look like we treat people like trash," another director added under his breath. "Because we do." Phones were no longer buzzing with the initial alerts. They were ringing now, assistants, banks, external investors, trading desks. Someone near the middle of the table covered his mic and said, "Pre-market indicators are reacting." "How bad?" another asked. "Double digits," he answered. "Down." Ethan ran a hand over his face. "You're comfortable with this?" He asked me quietly. "Letting everything crash." "This didn't crash because I withdrew," I said. "It cracked because your chairman decided humiliating someone on camera was more important than protecting the company he's supposed to steward." Gerald slammed his hand on the table. "The meeting is suspended," he said. "No," the lead independent director said. "It is. We're obligated to address governance now." "You're not removing me over one misinterpreted moment," Gerald said. "This isn't one moment," the director replied. "It's the culmination of a pattern, and now it has a price tag." The cameras kept rolling. No one reached to turn them off. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they knew it was already too late. What happened next wasn't loud. It was methodical. Boards don't stage revolts like in movies. They follow procedure. They call it extraordinary session. They reference sections of bylaws. They make motions. They vote. But underneath the formal language, something simpler was happening. Self-preservation. They'd watched their chairman humiliate the person whose capital they needed most. They'd watched him do it publicly. They'd watched him double down when it was pointed out. Now they were watching the immediate financial consequences. Whatever loyalty they had to him was no match for their loyalty to their own reputations. Within an hour, Gerald was placed on administrative leave as chair. Ethan's appointment was put on hold pending review. A committee was formed to re-engage with capital partners under revised terms. They tried to bring me into that last part. We can find a path forward, the lead director said to me in a smaller room afterward. Concessions, clarifications, a joint statement. There isn't a path forward, I said. We can structure governance changes, he insisted. New covenants, direct oversight from Pelion Ridge. I shook my head. This isn't about structures, I said. It's about culture. You built a room where your chairman thought he could say what he said and everyone would laugh. I'm not funding that. You're walking away from a lucrative deal, he said. I'm walking away from a chronic headache, I replied. Is there anything we can say to change your mind, he asked. No, I said. There is. He exhaled. Then I suppose this is where we thank you for the consideration thus far, he said, slipping into formal language like armor. You don't need to thank me, I said. Just learn from it or don't, but I won't be paying to find out which. The story hit the wires by afternoon. They didn't use my name in the first wave. The headlines focused on Northbridge. Private capital firm withdraws 2.5B commitment amid governance concerns. Incoming CEO's appointment questioned after investor walks. Board chair under fire after internal footage surfaces. I watched one segment muted in an airport lounge. Two analysts debated whether investor activism had gone too far. One of them said, "It's just a comment. People are too sensitive." The other replied, "It's a comment that cost them billions. That's not sensitivity, that's accountability." I didn't need the sound. I'd been there when the line was spoken. I'd been there when the clause activated. I closed the screen and turned my phone face down on the table. A message buzzed from Ethan. I should have said something. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then typed back, "You had the mic. You chose not to use it." I hit send. He didn't reply. Back at Pelion Ridge, my partners were waiting. We didn't high-five. We didn't gloat. We did what we always do. We debriefed. "What did we learn?" Sam asked. "That the clause works," I said. "It only works if you enforce it," he replied. "Then we enforce it," I said. "Every time." We sketched out the next fund that afternoon.